Welcome to Kershaw & Company. I want to start out by telling you a little bit about the reason for this tape and what we're doing here, and to give you some background about appraisals, appraisal work, who the important players are in the appraisal. These are some of the basics you're going to need to know in order to get started in understanding how to do the appraisal and who's involved. It's kind of an overview. First of all, I want to congratulate you on your decision to work with Kershaw & Company. I take that very seriously because in order to work in this company, we really have selected you because of your qualifications, the fact that we believe that you're an ethical and dedicated and hard-working individual. And so as we go through these things, I want you to understand that I've taken the time to put together this detailed training tape so that you can have probably the best quality training material to get underway and to start working. This is not MTV, and then you'll find out that this may not be the most exciting type of training there is, but I think it's a very efficient way of training, and I think you'll have a comprehensive study rather than doing it piecemeal with different things that are put in at various times. Let's first talk about what an appraisal is. First of all, an appraisal is an estimate of value, and there are a lot of reasons that people will want an estimate of value on their commercial property. Estimate of value. And there are a lot of reasons that people will want an estimate of value on their commercial property. And that's what we appraise as commercial property. Apartment buildings, strip shopping centers, industrial buildings, subdivisions, residential subdivisions as well as industrial subdivisions, multi-tenant buildings, apartment buildings. All those types of properties are considered to be commercial properties. You'll notice that residential subdivisions, mobile home parks, are really residential properties, but they're considered as commercial property because of their income producing capabilities. And most of our work is done for mortgages. That is, a property owner or a purchaser will go to the bank and they want to borrow, say, $500,000 to buy a property. They may be buying it for $1 million. And the bank wants to be assured that when they give a mortgage that the property is actually worth $1 million, or at least something more than what they're loaning on it. And other times we'll do an appraisal for the bank because the person hasn't paid on their mortgage and it's a foreclosure, and then the bank wants to decide exactly how much they can realistically get out of the property. So mortgage purposes are the primary reason that we do appraisals. There are a lot of other users of appraisals, such as attorneys, owners, people who are negotiating a buy-sell arrangement. Condemnation is another type of appraisal. A condemnation appraisal is when a condemning authority, say a city or a county, is expanding a roadway or putting in sewer or water easements, and they need some property, and it may be a narrow strip off at the front of the piece of land. They may take the whole property. In either case, an individual is due just compensation for their taking. So in condemnation work, the condemning authority or municipality will require an appraisal to determine how much they need to pay the property owner. That's another type. Another type of appraisal that we do is for estate planning. If someone's putting a property into an estate or into a different name or a corporate name or anything like that, they'll need to know how much the transfer is worth. They aren't really selling it to the estate, they're transferring it into the estate, and so there's no purchase price. And in doing so, they'll frequently need the value of the property. And so for tax purposes, estate planning, tax purposes, and perhaps for a partnership, they may need to know what the value of the property is. That's what we specialize in. That's where we're experts. And in knowing some of the basics and of appraisal practice, the theory behind it, where we get information, you will eventually be able to do those types of things. And I look forward to working with you on all types of projects. A question that frequently comes to mind is, what is an assessment? An assessment is very different than an appraisal. An assessment is what a tax assessor does in order to determine the assessed value of a property. Property taxes are supposed to be based on property's value for real estate. In other words, more expensive real estate properties will have a higher assessed value, and therefore taxes will be higher for that property than an assessment is not an appraisal. It's very different. The tax assessor does not use the techniques or the theory or the information that we use when we put together an appraisal. Of course, it's supposed to be based on market value, but it may or may not be. So we do not do assessments. We may do an estimate of market value. We may do an appraisal of a property so that it can be used, or so that it can assist the assessor in determining the assessed value. Or it may be used by the property owner so that they can fight the tax assessment, so that they can have a lower property tax rate. But in either case, an appraisal is not an assessment. And so when you do an appraisal, or when you talk about appraisals, don't use the word assessment. An assessment is very specific. It refers only to the assessor and what the assessor does in the assessed value. We don't do that at all. Some other things we don't do are personal property, business valuations, and we don't do residential appraisals. We do real estate and we do commercial real estate. And so we will appraise the ground and any buildings attached to it. If it's a home, it's probably not something that we should do. We're qualified to. We could do it. It's just not financially feasible. So if one of your friends asks you if you can appraise their home, you just can politely decline and say, we don't do those. And that's a convenient answer because we really don't do residential appraisals. Clients will sometimes ask us if we'll do a business valuation. A business valuation is the valuation of something that's intangible. It involves the goodwill a company may have, or the benefits that they have from employees working efficiently. They may have favorable contracts that allow them to produce a certain product at a very good price. And so that's a business value. And we really don't do those. All we do are the land and the buildings and, just the real estate. So, so we don't do business values. We don't do personal property. Personal property includes things like furniture, fixtures, stock, equipment. And so there are lots of things that are considered personal property. Generally, if you can walk away with it, load it on a truck without making irreparable damage to the building, then it's probably personal property. Chairs. In industrial buildings, sometimes cranes are considered personal property, but that's kind of questionable. Pictures, filing cabinets, all those types of things are considered to be personal property. If someone has a big conference room and they've got a beautiful oak table in the middle of the conference room, it's probably personal property, and we don't appraise that. Televisions, those kinds of things, cashiers, registers, computers, they're all considered personal property, and we don't appraise those. So we only do the real estate. And again, the real estate includes the land, the building, and those things that are permanently attached to the building. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the people involved in the appraisal. There's usually, of course, the appraiser, that's us, and there's a client and an applicant. The client is the person who orders the appraisal. It's usually the bank. They'll order the appraisal. They'll want to know what the property is worth. For instance, Andy Deep Pockets at NBD Bank may have a borrower who wants to borrow a certain amount of money, $300,000, for his business. The borrower's name is George Glumsotter. Andy Deep Pockets will give us a call and say, hey, would you look at George Glumsotter's building at 123 Industrial Drive? He thinks it's worth $500,000. And we'll say, okay, Andy, we'll be happy to do the appraisal for you, and we'll charge a certain fee, and he'll Andy will probably send us an engagement letter to formalize our engagement to him. In that case, Andy would be the client because he's ordering the appraisal. And George Glumsotter, the guy who owns the building at Glumsotter Industries, he's the applicant. He's applying for the loan. And he'll eventually pay for the appraisal if he hasn't already given Andy the money. And so we treat Mr. Glumsotter very respectfully because he's paying for the appraisal. And of course, he's involved in our work, and so we treat him very respectfully, and we'll contact him about information that we'll need about the building. But the client is Andy Deep Pockets, and the client is a significant player in the whole appraisal field. The client has certain significance to the appraiser. The client is the person that we serve. We do what he asks us to do. And as far as legal terms go, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the client. That is, that we serve him before we serve ourselves. Of course, we're looking for our fee in the whole deal too, and because we all want to make money. But we still have an obligation to serve him. And in fact, sometimes a client does not want us to disclose any information about the appraisal to anybody, to the applicant. They may, in fact, the client may not want